It's pretty crazy this opposition team thinks that if you're not getting deported but you see someone getting deported, that's incredibly relatable. But someone working a job and you also working a job isn't something that's relatable. I think the problem with this team is that they really haven't engaged with what the motion sets opposition has to do. That is, that majority of their characterization that they give you is pretty much wrong. That is that you can't just say that the left-wing media has become centrist media and say that, oh, we're going to co-opt all of our benefits about showing all the empathy anyways, because obviously there's a finite amount of time that Sky News or whatever news source is able to push out these stories. So, for example, on their side of the house, they would have to be able to contend with a world where 90% of your 1 hour is spent on ICE and deportees and only 10% is on the self-made stories. But even if you don't believe any of that, it really doesn't matter if they're somehow able to prove left-wing media is the same as centrist media, because the algorithm on social media is still going to select for the most clickbaity things that left-wing media is incentivized to make at least somewhat. So that means people are always going to be exposed to it. They can't keep running away from their burden in this debate. So what am I going to do in today's debate? First, I'm going to look at the perception and centrist. That's our first path to victory. And second, I'm going to look at the immigrants clash that has come up in this debate. What did we explain to you? First off, that we're going to have obviously more time on it. You're going to see it from social media, from news and friends. It's going to be saved. This affects voting behavior, etc., etc. Their first response to say was like kind of their Olympics thing, and it's like it's going to have some coverage anyways, and they try to co-opt the material. Obviously, the clash that I just explained about characterization already disproves this point, like for a large amount, so you probably can't believe this material. But second, we also explained that like good reasons why this is likely going to be a self-made thing. Because if they want to explain that this is something that left-wing media wants you to be able to watch, then obviously a rich guy becoming more rich isn't something that is that fun to watch. You want to watch someone who came from absolutely nothing and then worked his way in efficient chip shops and then he owned the shop himself. And that's the sort of media that we've already been able to prove to you. It's much more down to earth, which is much more relatable to the average centrist who doesn't have extremely radical views. So obviously then it's not about super success, it's just about notable achievements. I think they haven't really engaged with that necessarily. They try to overcome this by having another push about, oh, because it's more sympathetic and then like we're going to have more microaggressions due to the benchmark sort of material. I think first off, we already say again, like obviously getting deported by ICE isn't really that relatable because you yourself are not being. So I think even if you just weigh those up, having a job and like having some sort of success, maybe like you yourself are a business owner or you yourself had some struggles in school and now you're quite academic. I think obviously these things are much more relatable. But second, the incentives of the media is obviously to make them more vulnerable on your side of the house. This again plays into the clash later about how immigrants' self-perception is significantly worse. That means they're less likely to go in to get jobs. They're less likely to go to apply to a very successful school. Now, dealing with their microaggression material, I think obviously this is quite a false comparative because we already explained to you that those immigrants are trying to become equal to a normal person. It's not about different immigrants fighting against each other. I think obviously then we're just trying to put them on a pedestal, give them recognition for the success that they've already had. Because honestly, people are just kind of getting tired of sympathy. I'm going to get into this later about like why the historical historical mechanisms already is just like the premise of the case and therefore must be true. But people are honestly just getting kind of desensitized about it because note here, this is the clear comparative. You have unique stories. Maybe this person is a successful fisherman. Maybe this person is a successful self-made businessman in his own outright. Or you can just have constant media about this guy got deported, this other guy got deported, or this guy got some sort of police brutality. I think obviously those are things that they have already conceded have been shown for decades and decades and decades. So how could you say that this is something that is even close to unique? I think obviously people are getting tired of it. But even if they only explain why this targets the left-wing media and don't explain why immigrants or the centrist perception is likely going to change, given that you already believe they're desensitized. Finally, they explain then, that the media won't necessarily be that radical. We've already explained to you why that material doesn't work right from the beginning of my speech. Their final Hail Mary to attempt to win the centrist perception was just to say that people are unaware of these facts. I think obviously this isn't true because first, they already note that these haven't been prioritized in the status quo. So obviously they need to be made aware of all the good things that we have been able to show as well. But also, there's also other everyday things like talking to your friends. They don't engage with that. They also don't engage with why centrist media could also watch right-wing media, centrist media, or leftist media. The fact is they have been unable to prove why centrists don't have exposure to all types of media and therefore are going to be at least relatively aware. That's what makes them a centrist, because they haven't been able to decide which side they're on. We're the only team that has been effectively able to prove, one, that centrists are more likely to buy into the types of self-made stories which they can actually relate to rather than the stuff that they've been desensitized to in the past. But two, why this also means things like bank loans are going to be significantly easier, because when you see someone as an immigrant, you're not going to be like, okay, this person needs a higher income threshold because he's more risky, he's unable to be able to have a successful business. But when you see those stories, you're more likely to give that person the mortgage, you're more likely to give that person a loan. Obviously, this is a benefit, and they still haven't engaged with any of our voter material. I think that stands to actually change policy, which is important for immigrants, obviously. Okay, let's get into the immigrant crash. Note that we already think we've won this debate just on that first path to victory, but we'll deal with immigrants as well. We explained to you they're going to internalize the fear, so obviously they're going to be more stressed, which can lead to physical harm, like maybe their high blood pressure and then they have a car crash, or they're just not going to apply for things which they don't feel confident to, like a really good job, or like a pretty prestigious school. Their explanation was to say that historically, like, the left-wing media has done a good job, they've done what they're doing in the status quo, and it's been successful. Obviously, this is wrong, because if you watch the news, you'll know that ICE is deporting everybody who isn't like a porcelain level of white. Also, visas are getting declined left and right for absolutely no reason. You can't possibly claim this as some sort of historical premise. Either way, that's an incredibly unnuanced take of this debate. Their second and like actual real response this time is to say that only the high level of immigrants is going to come in, the ones that are already rich. First off, we already explained to you that this is obviously not what people are prioritizing in the left-wing media, because no one really gives a crap about someone who's rich already becoming rich. And either way, the focus of that isn't going to be about the immigrant himself, it's just going to be about the scale of money. So we don't even think that's a comparative that we should have the onus to take on. Obviously, it's going to be the people who are significantly more vulnerable and now have reached even just a normal position in society. I think they haven't dealt with our comparative, and it's making this debate incredibly difficult for them to win on this point. Finally, they explain like there's going to be like fighting between the immigrants themselves, and they're gonna like feel bad when they look at each other. Let's just take some time to explain this. First off, I really don't feel that this is the way that people think. Because, for example, let's take their family thing. They say like, oh, when you see like your cousin who's getting a high amount of academia, you're gonna feel really bad. You don't really feel that bad because you don't feel that society is judging you for that, because nobody else knows about it. But when you see this is on national media, that some like Chinese guy or some immigrant is able to be self-made, maybe he's put himself in a really cool job, or he's finally done the thing that he really loves and is being successful and being able to provide for your family. You feel you are in that shoe because you see his race and you put yourself together because you know that society is watching. It becomes much more macro. Even if you don't believe that analysis, we're still able to flip this relatively well. And just to say that the privileged ones are just going to see the poorer immigrants starting to get better, and they're like, oh, they didn't deserve it. You know, we're the immigrants that worked really hard. So either way, you don't believe that they've won on immigrants. What have we been able to prove? First off, that they have actually no mechanism for why awareness of empathy actually leads to change. Like, they don't explain how policy changes. They don't explain why centrists are more likely to vote. They just have some vague responses about like why people maybe will hate immigrants a little bit more and maybe will discriminate them a little bit less. But if you weigh this up with one out path to victory about your own self-perception as an immigrant, obviously this already takes out majority of how their even if best case is to win. But second, we already prove another important path to victory, that is that centrists are really important to this debate, that they have exposure from left-wing media, that it hasn't worked with their case in the past. And if you actually believe they're going to vote, if you actually believe that they're going to have better zoning laws for people, they're going to be more likely to hire these people, more likely to see that they're successful people, then you'll stand with team proposition. Maybe do some tipping point stuff. like why they haven't been able to prove a tipping point if they're just saying like historically this is what's worked. So then obviously we're the team with the tipping point because we have something that's new, right?
Yeah.
So if you can, yeah.
Yeah. Two ways to win this today, and I'll be able to fit it in 8 minutes. First, let's talk about what this media looks like. Because the analysis about notable achievements is a little bit lacking from kind of evidence in this debate. I think the first thing we want to do is that there are other ways to show success, so we are able to pull off a bunch of the benefits. Firstly, we say that you can be mentioned through other coverages. They say this is unlikely, but every time someone succeeds in traditional media, it's probably going to be mentioned that they're an immigrant at the very least. So if it is the case that people want to feel like they can succeed, that is probably when they're able to get to the world.
You see, that's not even the focus. You just mentioned it, exactly.
But also, I don't know if you want to say a speech, but like,
which means you will know
most immigrants don't want to be Olympic stars. They want to
and this is
organize.
actually better than their conception.
You're not reporting on that.
That's less relatable as well, anyway.
You're not reporting on the middle level. In traditional media, you're reporting for like Nobel Prizes.
Yeah, we need. Yeah, so maybe refocus the framing on just like immigrant to normal position, not immigrant to high position.
Secondly, we tell you this is going to be geared towards success from the majority point of view. Please give me a timeout at a time. There is going to be assimilation. That probably means that it's going to be success from the majority point of view, things like assimilation, rather than actually having success in the vast majority of circumstances.